Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. It's my privilege to introduce Tony, which most of you know, Tony Bamert from Bamert Associates. Tony, I didn't realize, I knew you've been in the business for a long time, since 1991. And of course, he has his office here within our building, which is a real treat to have him as a resource. And we're just very grateful to have him come and give us an update on the market today. So thank you, Tony.
All right, very well.
Take it away.
How's everybody doing? Robin asked me to kind of introduce myself. Everybody kind of knows me, and I know you, but maybe not everybody knows my history. So very briefly, I was born and raised here in Champaign. I went to Centennial. Mom still lives here in town. Went away to SIU in Carbondale back in '88. Yeah, right at the end. Right at the end. I try and play that down, but I did have a good time when I was down there. I got a degree in finance and real estate from SIU. I came back to Champaign. I spent a year working at Bank Champaign with Dean Clausen. I got hired by Jim Webster. I spent 12 years working with Webster Associates, doing both residential and commercial. So if anybody has any commercial questions, I can answer those. And then in 2004, Russ and Nick invited me to come here, and that's when I left Jim and kind of went on my own and made that jump that we've all made. So, and I've been here ever since. So about 20 years I've been doing it, more or less. Yeah, pass this down to Walt. Bill asked me to kind of update a little bit on my thoughts on the market, and I just briefly ran a few things off that we'll talk about. Robin, how long should we, is this like a 15 minutes or 45 minutes, or how long do we have here normally?
An hour.
An hour? Okay.
So you want to talk and then ask questions? Or how
Absolutely. I mean, I think normally these things go better when people start asking questions, and I think we get a little off track, but I think we all learn more. So we can talk about anything that anybody wants to, any appraisal question you've had, value question, how to deal with other appraisers, anything you want to talk about. So I handed out the sheet that everybody's got, the adjustments. I think most of you have seen that before. We could talk about that later, but I'm going to just briefly go through a few things that I pulled off this morning that I thought were interesting. Now, some people have seen I've done before the real detailed analysis on the market. I think I did it the last 2 years. The real thick book, basically going through kind of market by market, appreciation, depreciation, a lot of statistics. I have not done that this year yet. I've just been swamped. So it takes kind of a while. I'm not sure if I'm even going to get that done. But I brought a few things here that I thought just caught my eye. In no particular order. I've been getting a lot of assignments in Mahomet lately. Anybody sold anything Mahomet? Interesting to see kind of how the market is going right now. There are 96 listings right now in Mahomet. Anybody want to guess how many pendings are on? 42. That's a lot. 42 pendings in Mahomet. That's a lot. So you'd have to say that's doing great out there. Can't really explain that, but they are. Number of sales in Mahomet over 500,000 in the last 18 months? 1. So it kind of tells you at the high end out there. I know there's quite a few high. I've done several, including a Relo appraisal out in Thornwood and some of the other Oak Creek. If you look at some of the few sales we've had in Oak Creek, maybe a little lower. So I think that, again, in the median price ranges in Mahomet and the bread and butter ranges, it seems like demand is fantastic right now. As you get up there into those higher price ranges in Mahomet, kind of struggling a little bit still. Just not a lot of people wanting to jump into the 500,000 plus. Highest sale they've had in Mahomet in the last 2.5 years, 660,000. Nothing over that. I did not pull the Champaign statistics, but I did a week or two ago. I want to say, if you look at Champaign-Urbana or Champaign-Savoy 07, MLS area 07, I think there's been something like 20 sales over 450, 500,000 in the last year. So for whatever reason, there's still pretty good demand for the higher price stuff in Trails and some of the other areas, but when you get to Mahomet, for some reason, it's not there. St. Joe, kind of see a similar trend. 23 active listings right now in St. Joe, not a lot. 9 pending sales, I think that's pretty good. Median, this is interesting, median current price for an active listing in St. Joe is $183,000. Median price, there's 9 over $200,000 listed right now in St. Joe. Of the 9 pending sales, the median price on those was $150,000. So again, it kind of tells you that the bread and butter stuff is doing good. When you get to the higher price stuff within that St. Joe market, maybe a little oversupply. Only one of the 9 pending sales in St. Joe right now is over $200,000. So, and I think that kind of plays to the trend that we've all seen. I mean, I think if you look back over the last 3 or 4 years, I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that the higher price stuff has struggled more, and the stuff that's closer to median has done a little better.
Tony, what's the median price of the 42 pendings in Mahomet? Do you have that?
I did not write that down this morning, but you could certainly pull that up pretty easily. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably in that 150 to 175 range. That would be my guess, but you'd have to look that up. And then I pulled some data on, you've heard me talk about this before, when I think on the grid sheets. I always kind of like to look at Southwood and Holiday Park because those are big, large subdivisions with a lot of data points. And I kind of think of those, again, as kind of our bread and butter kind of neighborhoods. I mean, those are just kind of the consistent, always activity kind of neighborhoods. And I think those give a good benchmark of maybe of where we are in our median house price stuff. 2010, there were 33 closed sales in Southwood, and the median price was $139,500, which seems about right to me. 2011, 24 sales in Southwood, median price was $128,000. So 10 fewer sales, and prices were down $10,000. So I think that's pretty accurate. I think that pretty well sums up what's out there. For those who've been around a while and have watched a neighborhood like Southwood for the last 20 years, and you've kind of seen it go through its machinations, I don't think that would surprise anybody. Holiday Park, 2010, 31 sales at $114,000 on the median price. 2011, 41 sales, actually up a little bit, but the median price dropped to $106,000. So if you do simple, quick math, Holiday Park and Southwood were both down 10%, roughly. And if you look at, if you just look at a 1,500 square foot house in Southwood selling for $140,000, that's about what they were selling for 5, 6, 7 years ago, really. I mean, it hasn't really gone anywhere. I know that's hard medicine maybe for sellers to swallow. Buy levels. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this. I've appraised several recently. Buy levels in Holiday Park in particular, maybe Country Squire, maybe even a few in Southwood, although there's been one high sale in Southwood. Kind of hard to sell the buy levels right now. Anybody have a buy level listing?
I had one.
Anybody? Was it hard?
Yeah, we rented it.
Did you see? I can't really explain it. If you look at your nice, well-maintained buy level in Southwood, and you go back 3, 4, 5 years ago, they were selling for $135,000 to $145,000 all day long. All day long. I think Russ has one listed right now for $109,000. Nick had one for $109,000. Keller Williams has one for $107,000 over on Stratford. Just seems like just really hard to sell the buy levels. They're really taking kind of a beating. Anybody? I'm not even sure why. Anybody have any thoughts? Have you had buyers that have looked at buy levels and didn't want them? That's what I think.
I think I always find that the younger people get to like the high levels of trial levels now because they don't mind the stairs.
Bi-levels were always the answer for the family that needed more square footage but
Absolutely.
couldn't afford more. And I think price-wise, they kind of rose up, so they were competing with other floor plans, and I think they have to be sort of that bargain to compensate for the lack of market interest for the older crowd that wants to avoid stairs. So there has to be that benefit.
And maybe you had more subprime borrowers at the time that had 3, 4 kids, and maybe they're kind of out of the market now. Maybe. I mean, I went through Russ's. I did the appraisal on it on Westfield. I think it's 10. Did you go through it? Well, it was 1099. I think is what it's listed for. It's got a pretty well finished lower level. I mean, it seems like just a bargain, and it's just sitting there. I can't. And you'll see a ranch on a slab that'll sell for 105, and they could buy this one for 109. It doesn't really even make any sense to me. But just an observation that the buy levels seem like they're really struggling.
It seems like, too, I'm working with a lot of people who are, wanting more space, but they don't want stairs because one of the parents or somebody's going to be moving in with them in the next year or 2 years, and, which would, of course, rule out the buy levels, even though there is a lot of, space for your money.
Do you think the economy, and I'm asking you guys, do you think the economy has created more situations where you see larger family units, mom and dads coming together with the kids, or vice versa?
Either that or moving closer.
Yeah.
Moving closer.
Yeah, I don't see it. I've got a lot of clients with the two-family kind of situation with the concern for parent. I think it's not as much a function of the economy as it is of where the baby boomer generation is at this moment.
I was going to ask, does anybody do, along with national, local studies, the age of the buyers that have purchased? Because I'm with you. It's like I don't think there are as many young families with children that are jumping in, or either that, or the families are getting. I've heard some demographics about families getting smaller, fewer children per household, or people who are delaying having children.
I think that's probably true. Or delaying getting married, I've heard too. But I would think that would take a while to work its way into the housing market. We don't do anything locally that I'm aware of with demographics on age. It would be interesting to see that, though.
But there are lots of people who are getting ready to retire, and what do they say? Something like 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day, or something, or reaching retirement age every day, or something like that. It's some phenomenal number that just.
And obviously, baby boomers don't want the buy level.
Right, and you're looking at not buying, buying on the same level, doing away with the stairs.
Yeah, so interesting. So, yeah.
I read a statistic last week that said that more college graduates up to age 25 have moved home with mom and dad than they have in the last 40 years. And I think it said 3 out of 10 college graduates up to age 25
Don't tell me that. I got a 16.
What's that?
Don't tell me that.
Only 3 out of 10? I would have thought that. I would have really thought it would have been higher.
That was the national average.
Over 25.
What's that?
Did you say over age 25?
Up to age 25.
Up to, okay.
Yeah, I think that's what it
It's
said.
been harder for them to find employment, to get established.
Well, with college loans up to $100,000.
College
and
loans.
trying to pay that off in the car and everything.
Yeah, the college loans are just killer. I mean, kids coming out of 22, 23-year-old with 50, 75, $100,000 in debt, and not a lot of job opportunities. That's tough. That's tough. So we've kind of talked about a little bit about the high end, a little bit about the middle ground. Garden Hills, maybe below median price kind of neighborhood. 27 current listings right now in Garden Hills. And I did not do that by grid. I just punched in Garden Hills for neighborhood. I know sometimes we get a few that don't get the subdivision right. 27 listings right now in Garden Hills. 2 pendings. Not good. There were 13 sales, closed sales in 2011 in Garden Hills. Median price of those 13 sales was $45,000.
How much?
45. Now there's a couple on Hedge Road that are foreclosures that are getting in there. There is quite a bit of foreclosure activity in Garden Hills. I think the highest that I saw was 90,000 in Garden Hills, and that was a kind of a well-maintained buy level. But you've got one coming on in Garden Hills soon. Anybody else have any listings right now in Garden Hills? Or been a struggle?
Yeah, well, it's been on about 3 weeks, but we're priced 10 lower than the others with the same square footage.
Yeah.
And you know, we're not.
And it's tough because in that area of Garden Hills, I'm going to use my language carefully. That is maybe better maintained along Melinda in that area over there, Honeysuckle. You know, again, you go back 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, you know, 85, 90, 95 on those houses all day long. And now 65, 68, 70 to get it sold. So, you know, a lot more than 10% down, I think, probably in that area there.
Do some of these trends have to do with the age of the homes and where they are in maintenance? It's like, it seems to be in certain neighborhoods, it's like every inspection in that area, all of a sudden, they all need roofs. They all need something major. And that it's sort of a function of the age and where they're at. Like, they've all been through one roof replacement, but they're ready for number 2. You know, and the owner hasn't done it and the buyer doesn't want to deal with it. And then I find that kind of puts the buyer and seller at a standstill, because to me, the biggest trend I've noticed over the 20+ years is today's buyer does not want to do the work that a buyer would have done 15 years ago. They would have come in and renovated. Now they're too busy. They just want to move in. That to me is the biggest difference in the buyers today.
That's a great point. That's a great thing to maybe go off on a tangent on for a second. I mean, I think I laugh about SIU and the good times we had down there. You know, my first apartment down there was just a rat hole. Just a rat hole. It really was. But it was about a block from a nice bar, so that worked good. But you go over on the campus right now, and you look at, you know, the apartments that are being offered to 18-year-old, 19-year-olds, and they're luxury apartments. I mean, they really are, $1,000, $1,200 a month. The expectation, I think, for, and I've got a 16-year-old, so I'm pounding him in all the time. You know, every kid's got an iPod, every kid's driving a car to school, every kid's got a $200 cell phone, every kid's got everything. And so I think that does translate, you know, as they go up, they graduate from college, now they're married, now they're looking for a house. And whereas, you know, my generation, your generation, we didn't worry too much about maybe getting out the paintbrush, maybe doing a little bit of effort. I think the society that we live in, you know, across the country now, they just, you know, they want new. They want it new, they want it now, they want all the bells and whistles. And if it needs some work, we'll just look at the next one. So I think your point is well taken. Again, how to quantify that, I don't know, but I think that you would probably know better than I, working with younger buyers.
I totally agree with her.
Yeah.
They don't want to do anything, and they don't know how to do anything. So they want the house to be perfect when they buy it.
They haven't needed to learn any of those skills,
Right.
and so it's very foreign to them.
Pete, what do you think?
Well, going slightly beyond the, you know, just doing some repainting and stuff and having, you know, the willingness or the ability to do that, is I think you all would have found, you know, a lot of buyers are kind of cash strapped. They don't really have the capital to replace the cabinets or carpet in these 2 rooms. It really isn't a big deal, but they just don't have it. They look at it as, in a sense, kind of a rental. Is it the best I have seen, and can I fit into it per month? That's how they make the decision.
Time and money. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think those are great. I think those are great points. I mean, I always kind of look at, I guess, what I would call the cycle of houses, which is kind of what you alluded to. Now, when you get to a neighborhood like West Central Urbana, you know, all the houses are 70, 80, 90 years old. It's maybe harder to put your finger on that, but when you look at stuff like Cherry Hills, you look at those first phases of Cherry Hills, those houses are all about 25-ish years old now, 20 to 26, 27 years old. I think it's absolutely true that, you know, they're all getting to the point where they're needing roofs. They've got dated interior fixtures. All of the components have 25 years of wear on them now. And I can certainly tell from an appraiser that those properties, especially when you get over, what, maybe 200,000, they kind of take a hit because people are, well, I can buy this 25-year-old house that's going to need everything for $225, or we can maybe buy something that's a little smaller but 8 years old for the same amount of money and needs nothing. And so I think I've always, acknowledged that, a lot of that older housing stock that's competing with newer stuff directly, it absolutely takes a hit. And you can go into that core Cherry Hills or maybe some parts of Robeson Meadows now and just buy a beautiful house for, 190, 200, 210, 2,500 square foot, 2-story. So point well taken. I'll talk about the lender because I see it as an appraiser. I kind of see on the lender side. We're not really talking about FHA specifically today, but no question that the condition of the house has become more important in every market when you're dealing with either FHA financing, rural development financing, or even a lot of the conventional financing. The lenders are a lot stricter now on the condition of the property. And Matt Krieb was mad at me before he left because he sold a foreclosure over on Davidson. If anybody went through that house, that brick 2-story. And it was a little rough and it had kind of a big stained spot in the middle, and the buyer was getting conventional financing. We are required as appraisers to take pictures, interior pictures of every house we appraise for a secondary market loan. Living room, kitchen, bathrooms, any deferred maintenance, anything. So in that one, the underwriter said, what's the big stain in the middle of the living room floor? We don't like that. And there was some other, I think the utilities were off. They went, and anyway, it wound up creating a lot of problems. They got it closed. I think they wound up stepping up with some cash and getting it done. But the condition of the property matters a lot more now than it did 5 years ago. And there is FHA was almost a dinosaur program in '06. Now, probably half of the purchases that I'm doing under $150,000 have FHA financing. So the bar on these, the condition on these properties, they have to rise up to that level. And I think a lot of them, especially when you're talking about Garden Hills, a lot of the small towns, a lot of North Champaign, North Urbana, a lot of the older areas, it's hard to get those houses to get them up to that point. And like I mean, they don't have the money to get it done, so it's hard to make those deals go together. And that's one of the reasons why you see 27 listings in Garden Hills. I also think a neighborhood like that has been, two things have really hurt that. First of all, a lot of those subprime candidates in '06, '07, that would have been somewhere where they would have gone because they were working for $8 an hour at Menards, and this was kind of their way to eke into the market on these subprime mortgages, was at that kind of that lowest level. They're gone. That whole segment is just gone. There's no buyers. There was a lot of investors that were heavy into Garden Hills and a lot of the other below median price neighborhoods. A lot of people buying houses wanting to get involved in the Section 8 program. We had, I think, even a program here at one point in time on how to get into the rental business. Those investors are gone. Now there's some sharks out there, but the investors are gone. So, who's buying the houses in Garden Hills? No one. There's 2 pending sales and 27 listings. There's nobody. So tough stuff, but that's the reality. Somebody else have a question? Okay. And here's something that this is kind of a little bit more of information and maybe a little insight into what I do and how an appraiser thinks. I did an appraisal this past week in Ashland Park for Kraft relocation, transferring employee. And it's kind of your typical 2-bedroom ranch out in Ashland Park. And something that's especially if you've got a real consistent neighborhood like that, a good trick is to, if you can, is to go back and look at your comparable sales you've got in the neighborhood. And it's easy to do in Ashland Park because there's a lot of them. And then go back and find out what they paid for the house. So as an example, I was looking at one on Doisy Lane. House on Yallow, same same model, same house. Sold in February, just 30 days ago, sold for $118,000. Okay. I went back and looked up what they paid for it before they sold it for $118,000. They bought it in 06 for $136,000. $135,900. They bought it directly from Atkins. So now if it's just one oddball sale, you can throw it out. But if you feel like doing your homework, you could even go into Southwood or Holiday, wherever you're at, and you can go in and you can look at, especially if you've got a seller who's not wanting to budge on price, because that's a hard pill to swallow for a seller to say, we're going to have to list this for less than you paid for it. So it's good ammunition and it's good data as an appraiser. You go back and look at 10 sales, let's say, and on maybe 6 or 7, you might be able to find out that those people bought it in the last 3, 5, 7, 10 years. And you can see if there's a gap there. 3309 Noble sold for $118,000 as well in March 2nd. They bought it for $140,000 in 06. So they're down, what's that, 20,000-ish on those houses? And I just have 3, but my guess is if you went back and pulled 10, you could probably find 7 of them where they had sold it for less than what they had paid for it. So if you're going into to a listing presentation or you're trying to get a reduction, that's good data here. Here's your neighbors, here's what they paid, here's what they sold for it. Here's 7 of them in 4 blocks that all sold for less than what they paid for it. That's the reality, seller that you're living in right now.
And that's before closing cost you, so it's even another hit on top of that almost.
That's just raw data from the MLS. Yeah, that's right. So you don't have. That's exactly right.
I lucked out on a seller that I had. He was smart enough to see the market. He had a condo. He started saving money to bring to the table, which he had to bring $16,000.
It's tough.
But he had it saved to bring.
Well, how many people in Ashland Park got into those houses on 5% down? A lot. A lot. A lot. So you've probably got many, a high percentage of those owners that are underwater in those houses. Now, we don't have a foreclosure rush in Ashland Park. The sky's not falling out there. But still, if you're selling a house out there, and it's tough. And we talked about Southwood values being down 10,000, Holiday Park values being down 10,000 or 10%, whatever. You can do the same thing in those neighborhoods. And I just think, as an appraiser, sometimes I'll go and I did a condo over here in Harbor Town. It was a refinance, and I meet the lady, and first question out of her mouth, well, how much have these appreciated in the last 2 years? They had 7, now there's 7, Harbor Town, that's Sunnyview, there's 70 condos in that development. They had 7 listings 2 weeks ago. 10% of those units were listed. 2 of them were listed under 80,000, like one for 77 and one for 79 or something like that. Again, you go back to 05, 06, 07, 110,000, 115,000 all day long on those. So like that. So how much are those down? 20,000? This one was not on the water either. It was one of the few that were not. So it's tough sledding. So that's just a little bit of data stuff that I threw out there.
I was wondering if you could touch on West Central Urbana in terms of adjustments and what you've done with some of these other Champaign.
Yeah, we can transition into maybe the next page. Did you have a question, Pete, first on?
Maybe give a couple thoughts on the condo market itself. Wouldn't it be accurate to say that that's even been worse hit because there was a lot of building into the fall, like Cobble Field and all that. They were building those units and then.
Yeah, I've got a foreclosure appraisal this afternoon on Thornhill out in Cobble Field, Point, Turnberry, whatever that is out there.
They were selling in the 130s and now 118.
Well, we're going to find out, but that's about what I'm guessing this is going to be. 110, maybe even. It's a foreclosure, a little less.
You see it in like a Willow Springs. Those units 3 years ago, 80,000.
Exactly.
They were listed 69.
Exactly.
72.
You're dead on. So I always think about Old Farm. Those Old Farm units for a while, they were selling almost word of mouth. You know what I mean? Just cash, word of mouth. They wouldn't even hit the market. And now there's, I haven't checked recently, but I was showing some to my mom a couple months ago. I think there was 6 of them listed, including 3 or 4 that I know were probably Weisgarbers. So it gives you a little bit of an insight, doesn't it? I mean, when you know what it was and now you know what it is, as an agent, maybe the buyers and sellers don't know, but you just have that perception that, you know, not good. And I don't want to be too negative. We're not living in Orlando or Phoenix, but I think the condo market has definitely been hit. And when you talk about those kind of 2-bedroom, 2-bath, you know, 120, 130,000 mile, we have a glut of those things. They built a ton of those units. There are a lot of opportunities in that. 0 lot lines as well. 0 lot lines in. Now, some have been hurt worse. I think if you're out there in Boulder Ridge, along the interstate, in that pocket, we've had a lot of foreclosures out there.
And some of those were investor owned and then they just got pounded.
A lot of them, yeah. Yeah, so.
And there are a lot of rentals there.
A lot, so, you know, that pocket's maybe, but, you know, creates opportunity too, doesn't it? If you've got a buyer that is maybe willing to kick a lot of tires and lowball some people, you might be able to go out there and steal a nearly new unit for, you know, $85,000. Yeah, or less. You know, so, but I think you're spot on. I think the condo markets have been hurt. Willow Springs, yes, those common units over there, those 2-bedroom units on with Beck and Christopher and Oliver and all those streets over there.
Now they're more difficult even just in the last 2 years to finance because there's too much of a proportion of rentals.
Pay close attention to that when if you are on either side of a transaction in a condominium complex, that the lenders are really scrutinizing the documents and the percentage of ownership. It varies a little bit by lender, but the 2 questions they always ask are the majority of units owner occupied? Because if you have 51% or more that are investor owned, you're done. It's not going to happen. And does any one person or one entity own more than 10% of all the units? That second question has created some problems in Colony West for a while because I think Joe Wampler owns some units over there, quite a few units over there. So just pay attention to those are the 2 questions. If you're working in a condominium development, you're not sure, or, you know, you about the financing, you know, see if you can get to an officer of the association and ask them those 2 questions. 10% one owner, more than 50% investor owned. There are some lenders that have a higher ratio on the investor owned. In other words, they want to see 60% owner occupied or 70% owner occupied. It varies a little bit by lender, but never 100% of the time, if it's 51% or more investor owned, you're done. You're not going to be able to get financing. Those units out there across from Parkland, Carla Condos, Carla Care, that little pocket in there. They had, I think Steve Whitsitt maybe even owned 4, 6, or 8 of those units or something at one time, and really had a difficult time getting financing on those because of those ratios. Colony West, you know, I don't know how many Mr. Wampler owns now. Willow Springs, I don't think there are quite a few rentals at Willow Springs. I've never heard of that being an issue out there, though I think your percentages are okay.
Richardson used to own a huge chunk of Willow Springs. They tried to anyway.
Get that some
What
idea.
about Stillwater, Urbana?
Well, that's a good question. I have not done one out there in a long time. They had quite a few investors out there, though, didn't they? They had sold some of those units to some out-of-state investors. So I would.
And rentals.
And rental.
I think they're okay right now.
I would ask. I mean, I would have to go through the same process I would have to figure it out. But just be aware of that.
Cobblefield had an issue about that at one point. Did they break
did.
into 2 different associations?
They might have. I'm going to find out this afternoon because I'm working out there and I'm going to.
I thought I had seen recently that some of those units had gone FHA in Cobblefield. So
Ramshaw
Ramshaw owned a
got
huge
rid of
bunch.
his 10.6%,
Okay, I was gonna
he's
say,
down to
'cause
9.9.
he owned a huge chunk of that last section that went in, and financing there was just really horrible, terrible, whatever you want to say, for a long time.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if they.
So I'm gonna call in the next day or two to find that out, because I'm doing this as a foreclosure, but they're gonna ask me that question, so I need to know the answer to it. But just be aware. Just be aware of what it is.
I do have a question,
Yeah.
and we talked about it very briefly before the meeting started. I happened to bring along the last item that you did. You mentioned the numbers hadn't changed, but yet the market has changed considerably. But the numbers that you're using haven't changed.
Not a lot. They've tweaked them. I mean, you could do 10%. I mean, so let's say Southwood as an example. Does everybody have this sheet? Okay, so I think is there anyone that has not heard me talk on this before? On the adjustments and stuff, so everybody understands kind of what we're doing. So if you said Southwood 25 per square foot on an adjustment typically, and if that market is down 10%, could you adjust at $23 a foot? Yeah, sure, you could. You're kind of splitting hairs in my mind, because really the data will take care of itself. You know, all the sales prices were down, so you could tweak your adjustments by 10% if you wanted, but you're still going to get the same basic range of value as an appraiser when we're doing it. I'll just touch on my points 1 through 4 up here. Always consider what is typical for the neighborhood, and I've been doing it long enough now. It doesn't happen very often, but once in a while I'll get into a situation where I'm in a market that I haven't been into in a while. And you always kind of have to say what's typical for the neighborhood. I've got a foreclosure appraisal in Georgetown I'm looking at this week. I don't go to Georgetown a lot, so, but you can just, let's pick Cherry Hills. You know, if you just kind of look up and down the street in most Cherry Hills, you know, parts of Cherry Hills, what are you going to see? Traditional 2 stories, maybe some ranches, 2-3 car garage, pretty decent maintenance on most of those houses, you know, average to good quality levels. You know, if you saw one that was an ultra contemporary house, if you saw one that had a 1-car garage, you know, if it's, you know, it needs to conform to that neighborhood, and that's where the value is created. So, you know, if you're looking at a house, either with a buyer or a seller, you're trying to price it, and it sticks out, you know, it's going to be an issue for the appraiser. I'm trying to think of examples. You know, two-bedroom house. Is a 2-bedroom house functional or dysfunctional? Is a 2-bedroom house in Cherry Hills functional?
No.
No. Is a 2-bedroom house on the 300 block of West Standage functional? Absolutely. They're all bungalows over there. So there is no rule. It's the consistency with your neighborhood that creates value or deficiency or problems with value. Maintenance items do not return much. I get this all the time. I got it yesterday. Roofs, furnaces, normal painting. What's a house worth without a roof? Not a lot. Not a lot of market for a house without a roof. Did one in Paxton yesterday. The guy put on a new roof. Looked good. Does it add a little value? A little bit. Does it add $10,000 to an $80,000 house in Paxton? No. No. And I've had people give me 3 pages of every expense they've done in 27 years of owning the house. And they just kind of, you know, they come up with these bizarre mathematical equations of what the assessed value plus 10% plus your commission plus every dollar they've ever put into it. And they think their house in Southwood is worth $400,000. You know, it's like, no. Maintenance items typically are maintenance items. They don't add a lot of value to the house. Few items return dollar for dollar. I just cringe because every year the News Gazette or USA Today runs some kind of crazy article on if you put $10,000 in your kitchen, it adds $15,000. Well, if you live in a trailer in Homer, it doesn't work that way. Okay, it doesn't. And people grab onto those kind of things and they bring them to the appraiser, the realtor. You know, very, very few things return dollar for dollar. I don't care what the USA Today says. You know, occasionally central air on a house that doesn't have central air, if you can add it for $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, probably is a good return. Landscaping, as an appraiser, falls into 3 categories for me. It's either below average, it's average, or it's knock your socks off. And I've had wonderful little old ladies give me lists of every tulip bulb they've planted since 1947. God bless you, you know, it's average. You know, it looks good, but you know, as an appraiser, we just do not give a lot of credibility to how much money you've spent on your landscaping, and it's tough. You've got one right now, didn't you? What did she do? She put in a...
The gal, it's 1503 West Church. I think some of you went through it. She spent $8,500 on a Japanese garden in her backyard, waterfall and everything. And she put a new roof on the house. She got to get, I even want to list it what she paid for it 3 years ago, and I didn't. But she realizes she's not going to get a dollar out of that Japanese garden.
And that's tough for people as well, because landscaping, you know, a roof is a roof, but landscaping becomes very personal for people. I mean, it's their blood and their sweat, and they really, you know, if you insult their landscaping, you've insulted them personally. But the reality is, I don't make landscaping adjustments unless it's just really exceptional or really awful. So, do you find that do buyers give a lot of credibility to landscaping? It's the house, isn't it, really? I mean, a crummy house with great landscaping, they're just going to keep driving by, right? Fences.
Size of your backyard.
That's interesting, because I'll be honest, I rarely make a fence adjustment, but I probably should. I probably should give more credibility.
Because they all have a dog or kids.
Yeah.
It might be worth $1,000.
Mostly dog.
Yeah, it's a small adjustment, but it's a significant factor in a decision.
All right.
But
I think the landscaping, just driving by really helps, because some people do just drive
Curb
by.
appeal. Yeah.
Curb appeal. Yeah.
And it also reflects on the maintenance and condition that people are so concerned with. If they see nice landscaping, there's this assumption that the house is as well taken care of.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, I usually tell people that I phrase it, you know, it helps the marketability of the home, no question. But that's a hard thing to put a number on as an appraiser.
Versus value.
To say it's worth $1,700 extra dollars is hard for me to do as an appraiser. Especially if you're in Cherry Hills, when most of them have what I would call kind of decent, normal landscaping. And then just the other adjustments, I know the MLS has a program of some kind, I've never used it, for doing CMAs when it makes some adjustments to help you price homes. Again, I've never used it. I don't know if it's good or bad, but these are kind of the things that I've kind of learned. I think most appraisers would have about the same ballpark numbers on how to adjust, what adjustments to make. So you can read them. Anybody have any questions on my adjustments? Like them, don't like them, use them? I think Fred said he's used them a couple times. Are they helpful? Yeah. They're ballpark. They don't work they're not set in stone. They're kind of guidelines, I guess. But I think that's probably accurate.
It's interesting, through the years, you've added the condition line in the last couple of years, and that's absolutely appropriate to what we're seeing.
I think so. I mean, a lot of appraisers like to plug a number in there for condition. They'll just put 10,000 or 5,000. I always like to frame it as percentages. I just think you get more consistent results if you do that. You don't have to, but if you have a house, and it kind of makes sense. So you say if you have a house in Southwood, well-maintained ranch, 1,500 square foot, let's say it's worth 140,000. You've got another one that may be a little rough, kind of dated interior. And what's that going to sell for? 130, 125? You know, it's good. It's probably 10%. Is probably a good, pretty close number there for the discount that it's really going to have. Before we wrap up, the second page here is just kind of what I see as far as construction costs. And this is still pretty true. This really has not changed much in the last few years. Concrete costs might be up a little bit. Those might be a little slim on the concrete cost. But basically, basement is raw, unfinished basement. New construction cost is probably in that $18 to $20 range. It's probably, so if you go out to Savoy, where you still have a little new construction, I think Bill Pfeiffer and Steve Mead are still building some houses out there in Savoy. Those basements out there, probably standard basement, 18 to 20 for a poured concrete basement. Your base house prices, I think, are still probably $70 to $80 a square foot. Smaller towns, maybe not Mahomet, but Gibson City, Tuscola, something like that. You probably labor's maybe a little less down there. It might be a little lower, but garage 20 to 25. That's maybe a little bit low too. Maybe 25 to 30 on garage space. Fireplace still about 1,500. Patio, well and septics. Anybody had a well or septic number recently? 5,000 or 6,000 usually for a well, and 5,000 or 6,000 usually for septic if there's no problems.
The new aeration systems, which they're having to put more and more in out in the county, they're running closer to 80,000.
A little higher than on those fancier newer ones.
Is that a requirement? Is that a new
It's
a county requirement?
Yeah. If you've got a bad septic out in the county, you've got to have a lot of acreage. You need a couple of acres because they want you to put the fields so big. Sold a little house that was 1 bedroom, 1 bath, 900 square feet on an acre and a half. And the county made him put in, he had to pretty much use up the whole lot to give them what they needed and put a pump in case they had to pump the water someplace. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff. But in the smaller towns where you have no lot and your septic goes bad, then they'll let you do the aeration system. But either way, you're looking at, the aeration's at least 8,000. Unless they let you put it up, they'll let you hook it onto your septic, I think, and then they put it out there and they dig a pit and the whole 9-foot rock. And
So maybe a little higher than on those numbers, a little.
Yeah, they're looking.
Pushed up a little bit. Okay. Any questions on anything we've talked about? Anybody want to go on a different, anybody had a positive or negative
I have a funny story.
issue with an appraiser?
I had a lady who just asked me if I would paint for her. I'm telling her she's your
full service realtor.
That is.
I said, I used to paint myself, but I don't even do it in my own house anymore.
I watched Brenda Keith go out to a garage in Foosland that I did an FHA appraisal on, and she painted the side of a garage the night before the closing to get that thing sold. So it happens. Pete?
I don't know how many of you all do some activity in St. Joe, but it's kind of interesting what's happening just in St. Joe. I happen to have a couple of past clients. I've got a listing. I'll have another one shortly. But pricing valuations there are increasing. There's only 23 houses on the market right now. And I'm talking not just the Meadows, which can be crazy per square foot just because they're younger, but in Crestwood and Crest Lake, those 3-bedroom ranches, you're seeing them pop up on the market well over $100 a square foot. Okay condition, a little better condition, but not new. So
Those houses have always enjoyed good marketability. I mean, those Menninger built some of those, Robin Gray, there's been a few other builders out there. I mean, those have always sold really well. That whole Crestwood, Crest Lake area. Again, that's kind of bread and butter for St. Joe. And yeah, when you look at 9 pending sales, and I think, 5 or 6 probably right in that core area right there, probably ranches. So always done well right through there, no question. And not this year, but when I did my full-blown analysis over the last 2 or 3 years, I mean, that core area of St. Joe held up as well as any market anywhere in the county, anywhere. Savoy and St. Joe, maybe not right now, but going back 2 or 3 years ago, St. Joe just was right here. Even when Muhammad was struggling a little bit, they were just right there. And yeah, one of our best performing markets without a question. Any other positive or negatives? Anybody dealt with an out-of-town appraiser lately that they didn't know, who tripped them up or they didn't like? Seemed like they've got that problem solved. I know for a while we had some people coming here from Timbuktu. Danville. If you get, I mean, just my perspective, and then we'll finish. If you get a call from an appraiser that you do not know, first of all, there is no rule, regardless of what you're told, there is no rule, none, that prevents the appraiser from talking to the agents, period, ever. There is no rule.
They can't talk to the lender, but they can talk to the agent.
The appraiser is not supposed to talk to the loan officer.
Or the loan officer. Okay, the loan officer.
Because they don't want the loan officer saying, Tony, I need you to appraise this for $200,000, blah, blah, blah. Or I'll never send you another appraisal. So they put up that wall. There actually is no rule that prevents me from even talking to an underwriter or someone else that is, I think as long as they're not directly compensated by the proceeds of the loan, if they're salaried basically, then I can talk. Now some lenders have kind of put a bigger wall there, but I know we have one appraiser firm here in town that will say, well, I'm not allowed to talk to you. Not true. They just don't want to talk to you. So if you get a call and you don't know who the appraiser is, and you're kind of, is this person dubious? Here's what I would do. I would meet them at the house. I would give them comparable sales that are rational. I mean, don't be crazy with them, but give them good sales. I would ask them if they are a participating member of the Champaign County Association of Realtors. As an appraiser, I belong to 4 different MLS boards because I work a pretty wide territory. You can't do your job if you don't belong to the board. If you don't have access to the information, you can't be a good appraiser. So just because they're coming from Danville doesn't mean they're a bad appraiser, they don't know what they're doing. But if they're coming from Danville and they don't belong to the board, then that's a red flag to me. So if you get that situation, I would be proactive. I would ask them that question, put them on the spot up front. I would meet them at the house. Don't just give them a key. I would meet them at the house, stay there while they do their job. I know you're busy, but it's time well spent. And I would provide them with some solid, accurate comparables from the board in the neighborhood that they can use and take back with them. So just food for thought.
I find the biggest problem with an out-of-town appraiser is they don't understand sometimes the nuances of the neighborhoods, that the proximity to the university for a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house could be so significantly higher than that same house 2 miles further east. And they just can't understand why someone would pay so much more money for the old adage of location, location, location. That seems to be the biggest hurdle the out-of-town appraiser, or proximity to, let's say, a Carl Park, or, over in Champaign, the other park over by Prospect. There's like these little pockets of high desirability, and 2 blocks away it changes. Yep. But if you're on that park, they miss that significance of that the market recognizes the increased value of the location.
Across Race Street, it's a whole other ballgame, right? You go north of Iowa, it's a whole other ballgame. So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So that's why I say be proactive. Get the 2-bedroom sales on Delaware and Vermont or wherever, and take those over and explain it to them and talk to them about it because they may not know. Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.